The year is 2126, and waking up feels nothing like it did for your grandparents. It feels like the world already knew you were about to open your eyes. Marcus Vail, 34 years old, project architect at one of the largest neural design firms on the eastern seaboard, opens his eyes at 6:47 a.m., not because an alarm screamed at him, but because the apartment itself decided he had slept enough. The ceiling above his bed shifted from deep black to a soft amber gradient, not a light turning on, but a transition, the way dawn used to work before most cities sealed their skylines with layered atmospheric grids. The temperature in the room had already climbed 2 degrees over the past 18 minutes. A barely audible frequency, something between a tone and a breath, had been cycling through the room's acoustic layer for the last half hour, gently pulling Marcus out of deep sleep in stages so gradual he never felt the border between unconscious and awake. This was AIDEN, Adaptive Integrated Domestic Environment Node, the system that managed every square meter of his apartment on the 41st floor of Creston Tower, and it had been learning his sleep patterns, stress indicators, and recovery needs for 3 years. Marcus sat up. The bed itself adjusted, the lumbar support softening, the surface redistributing as his weight shifted forward. He didn't touch anything. He didn't say anything. AIDEN already had his biometric data from the sleep sensors woven into the mattress fabric, and it had spent the last 6 minutes cross-referencing his cortisol levels, hydration index, and yesterday's caloric deficit to determine exactly what his body needed this morning. By the time Marcus stepped into the kitchen, barefoot, wearing the lightweight thermal mesh he slept in, the counter was already active. Not in the way of some clunky automated machine from a century ago, rattling and steaming and making its presence loudly known. The surface itself was the machine. A shallow induction field had already warmed the ceramic base. A sealed protein cartridge had been punctured and measured. Real eggs, actual biological eggs, not the printed kind, a minor luxury Marcus allowed himself 3 times a week, were cracked by the articulated arm that lived flush inside the counter edge when not in use. The arm moved with a precision that was almost unsettling if you weren't used to it, which Marcus absolutely was, though he still sometimes watched it out of something that wasn't quite admiration and wasn't quite unease. Coffee was already done, not brewing. Done. AIDEN had started the process at 6:44, calculating the exact moment Marcus would reach the kitchen based on his movement pattern from bed to bathroom to hallway. The coffee was a dark Ecuadorian single-origin blend, the beans sourced from one of the climate-stabilized highland farms that had expanded significantly after the 2094 agricultural restructuring. The cup was already at the right temperature. Marcus picked it up and drank without checking anything. No screen, no notification panel, nothing. Just standing at his counter in the early morning quiet while the articulated arm finished folding the egg into a low-heat pan. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window, the city was already in motion. Creston Tower sat in what used to be called the financial district, though that term had dissolved into irrelevance sometime around 2080 when the physical concentration of financial infrastructure became largely symbolic. What remained was the architecture, towers, walkways, elevated transit corridors, and the movement. From 41 floors up, Marcus could see 3 sky lanes running parallel above the mid-level connector roads. Silent, elongated transit pods moved through them in loose formation, their hulls a matte graphite that caught the early light without reflecting it sharply. Below, at street level, the autonomous ground vehicles formed their usual morning pattern, not traffic in the old sense, no congestion, no horns, just a calibrated flow that adjusted in real time to pedestrian density, weather conditions, and the 1,000 other variables the city's mobility grid processed every second. Marcus ate standing up, looking at the city. The eggs were exactly right. They always were. At 7:31, the apartment signaled an incoming connection, not with a sound, but with a shift in the ambient light near the far wall of the living space, a soft blue pulse that Marcus recognized without thinking. He set down his cup, moved to the open area of the room, and said, "Accept." The wall didn't display anything. The projection materialized in the air between Marcus and the window, a full-scale rendering of a person, 3-dimensional, occupying space the way a physical person would, except with a faint geometric sheen at the edges that made it clear this was a holographic presence and not a body. It was Selah Oren, his lead structural consultant, calling in from a node station in what had formerly been known as Cape Town. She looked like she was standing in his apartment. Her expression told him the call was not a casual one. "The Halverson site failed simulation overnight," she said, without a greeting. In 2126, professional holographic calls had quietly abolished small talk. When you were rendered life-size in someone's lighting space, the usual social lubrication of a voice call felt unnecessary and slightly absurd. Marcus crossed his arms. Which load model? All 3. AIDEN flagged the seismic recalibration data at 3 a.m. and pushed it to the site team. The variance in the sublayer projections is outside acceptable range by a significant margin. We're talking about a full redesign of the Eastern Foundation cluster. They spoke for 19 minutes. Salah's holographic form gestured, pulled up data panels that hovered between them in the shared augmented layer, schematics, load charts, soil density models, all of it visible to both of them simultaneously, edited in real time, notations appearing in the air as they talked. When the call ended, Salah's presence dissolved cleanly, and the apartment returned to its ambient state in under a second. Marcus stood in the quiet for a moment. Then he said, "AIDEN, transit to the Meridian Hub.
hub. Departure in 20 minutes. Confirmed, Aiden said. Its voice was not robotic. It was not trying to sound human either. It existed in a register that was simply its own. Clear, unhurried, without affect. Your transit pod has been requested. Current estimated arrival window at Meridian Hub is 11 minutes from departure. Weather advisory. Elevated particulate index at altitude. No structural impact en route. Marcus moved to the wardrobe. The panel slid open before he reached it. If you're finding this world as fascinating as Marcus does, hit that like button and subscribe, because we're just getting started and it only gets deeper from here. He dressed in 4 minutes. A structured jacket with embedded temperature regulation. Dark trousers with a slight compression weave that aided circulation during long VR sessions. Shoes that sealed themselves once his heel pressed down. No tie, no watch. The only physical fabric Marcus wore that carried any weight of habit was a narrow ring on his right hand, matte black titanium, which had belonged to his father and contained no technology whatsoever. He wore it because it was the one thing in his daily life that Aiden could not optimize. At 7:52, he stepped into the elevator corridor. At 7:54, he was on the transit platform on the building's 43rd floor, 2 levels above his apartment, accessible through an interior shaft, where a 6-person autonomous pod was already docked and waiting, its door aligned precisely with the platform gate. No driver's compartment, no cockpit. Just a clean interior, 6 adaptive seats, indirect lighting, and a destination already loaded into the city mobility grid. Marcus sat. 2 other passengers were already inside. A woman in her 50s reviewing something through a thin visor, and a younger man who was clearly deep in a remote VR session, his eyes half open in that particular unfocused way that meant his visual cortex was receiving from somewhere else entirely. Neither acknowledged Marcus. He didn't acknowledge them. The pod sealed, detached from the dock, and moved. The experience of pod transit was nothing like what films from the 2040s had imagined. No sensation of speed, no dramatic tilting, no panoramic vistas of a gleaming future city. It was quiet and smooth and almost boring in the way that all genuinely efficient systems eventually become boring. The pod navigated the skyline at regulated altitude, made 2 minor course adjustments that Marcus didn't even feel, and delivered him to Meridian Hub at 8:06, 2 minutes ahead of the estimated window, because the morning grid was running lighter than predicted. Meridian Hub was not a building in any traditional sense. It was a convergence node, a physical anchor point for the distributed work infrastructure that most professional firms use instead of conventional offices. Structure itself was modest by the standards of the towers around it. 12 floors, wide floor plates, no ornamentation. What made it significant was what existed inside its walls, the most stable, highest bandwidth neural sync environment available on the eastern seaboard, maintained by a consortium of firms including Marcus's own. He passed through the entry corridor, no badge, no scan. His biometric signature registered passively as he walked, and took the lift to the 7th floor, where his firm maintained 4 permanent BR bays. The bay he bees was already initialized. Aiden had transmitted a session crouch 40 minutes ago. Marcus sat in the haptic chair, fitted the thin neural sync band around his temples, and closed his eyes. When he opened them, he was standing on a vast white platform suspended above a simulation landscape, not a fantastical one, on a precise digital twin of the Halverson site in what used to be called New Jersey. Every measurement, every soil layer, every structural element rendered 1-to-1 scale. ARA, the AI design assistant,